Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Path, a gamer's guide to mastery. The Path, Chapter 3, on deliberate practice. Structuring growth. Increasing the efficiency of practice is an ongoing process. Be deliberate and create clear objectives for each training session. By isolating variables in a complex game, more control is gained in emphasizing elements most pertinent to your personal progress. Define your preferred strategic approach. Discover your weaknesses in execution and refine your mechanics one deliberate step at a time. Defining strategy. The basis of organizing your practice lies in understanding your preferred approach to the game. Consider whether you prefer to play aggressive, solid, or greedy. The aggressive approach. Find or create builds with clear points of attack. Practice the builds alone, or polish progression. Test the builds against live opponents. Review scenarios where attacks failed to deal sufficient damage and consider alternative target prioritization. Review scenarios where macro mechanics slipped during engagements. The solid approach. Find or create builds which take into account various forms of aggression with plans for defense. Memorize a series of scouting timings to enable appropriate adjustments. Practice the builds alone to polish progression. Test the builds against live opponents. Review scenarios where critical damage was taken versus aggression and identify errors in the defensive procedure. Identify missed scout timings. Consider the ideal counter composition to a given opponent composition and how to achieve a win condition. The greedy approach. Emphasize rapid economic growth. Identify defensive corners to cut to further establish an economy lead. Find opportunities to leverage early advantages into effective aggression. Accept the range of consequences for risks taken. That is, if you don't defend a base, it might die, and you're signing up for that. Improve spending skill to leverage full value of an economic advantage. On refining mechanics. Improving your mechanical interaction within the game strengthens your strategies and streamlines execution. As a musician manages their instrument, so the modern gamer wields keyboard and mouse. Mastering the keyboard. Customize your hotkeys, experimenting with alternative layouts or creating your own. The core, grid, and standard. I use the core for StarCraft, and I do customize my hotkeys for both Classic WoW and Dota. Organize hotkey assignments by frequency and urgency of use. Simply put, the abilities that you spam the most should be easy to reach, and the abilities that you need to be able to spam very fast should also be easy to reach. Assign control groups to better manage your forces. Here's an example hotkey setup. In your first group, you have your town hall structures, like hatcheries, nexus, or command centers. In your second group, you have your main army. Your third group could be a finesse group, like mutalisks or phoenixes or whatever. Your fourth group could be siege units, tanks, lurkers, tempests. Fifth group could be transports, like a warp prism or drop overlord. The sixth group could be dedicated defense, like queens. Seventh could be a certain caster group, High Templar, ghosts, infestors. The eighth group could be another kind of caster that you don't want in the same group as the other one. I keep my vipers and my infestors always on separate keys and always on their own key. For 9, you could have a scout, like an overlord, an observer. And for the 10th, you could have another scout. And I highly recommend drilling the use of these hotkeys outside ranked practice. One way that you could achieve this is you just get up to 200 supply with the worker count and the composition that you want to make. And then just practice moving the pieces around. Double tap the main army to jump to that location. Double tap the queen group to get your queens. Double tap your scout. Double tap your other scout. And then go through your camera locations. This kind of repetition helps you a whole bunch to just memorize all these different steps. If you only ever get to practice your infestor hotkey once every 20 games, you're not going to be very fast about it. But if you do a max out and you have some infestors, you could just practice that over and over again and get pretty quick with it. Mastering the mouse. Optimize your DPI and sensitivity settings to better fit your play. And utilize mouse accuracy trainers. I use aimbooster.com just as a nice way to get focused. I get to warm up with my mouse control. I just do the challenge mode and try to click as many bubbles as I can. If you're curious, my mouse DPI is 400. A lot of StarCraft pros use about 800. And I often caution people against having the DPI super high because that causes your wrist to bear most of the strain of moving the mouse around. If you use a lower DPI, say 1,000 or less, you engage your forearm and your shoulder a good bit more, which distributes the strain of rapid motion over a lot more of your tissue. So that's going to be a lot easier over the long term. You have less chance of injury and strain. Use ranked play as a tool. Do not be used by ranked play or blinded by it. Deliberate practice creates conditions for learning independent of victory by focusing on improving upon your fundamental skills. Structure your growth and enhance your quality of practice over time. So, deliberate practice for me is something that, I'll be honest, I'm not always deliberate with my practice. If I'm really tired and I haven't really had the best day, sometimes I just throw myself at the ladder and try to win, but I don't really have such a clear emphasis. And that's okay. We're not robots and we're not perfectly consistent. What I would recommend is when you do feel like you have a good amount of energy for that day, is set 1 or 2 intentions for the session where you're really trying to hammer down a part of the game that you feel like you're not the best in and you want to see that improve. One thing that I've been focusing on lately is dealing with the first 2 adepts in ZVP. In my tryhard session last week, I was just consistently losing to Protoss and I couldn't figure out why. It seemed like whether they went air or they went ground, they were just kicking my butt. So I went over a few of the replays and I noticed the first adept and the second adept were consistently getting too much damage in. And that was because of my mistakes with my queen placement and my ling management. So for this Tuesday, when I was laddering, I was saying to myself, just thinking, if I defend the first 2 adepts well, it's a win. And that puts me in a really positive mindset where I feel like I have a clear goal, I can achieve that, and then I can just move on and have fun with the rest of the match. I can try this and I can try that, but I'm not really putting my reputation and my rank and everything on the line. I'm just trying to get better at the matchup by looking at an area where I'm struggling or I'm not very strong, and then just really focusing, even over focusing on fixing that aspect of the matchup. Another thing that wasn't mentioned here, but you could work on for deliberate practice, would be finding a sparring partner for your weakest matchup. A thing that I've done historically is I'll look at my win rates for the season. You can go to, in StarCraft, the race report, and I'll just look versus Protoss, Terran, and Zerg, what are my win rates, and which one am I weakest at? Just find a Protoss, in my case, and get some games in. I played some games with Ryan, and he went over some of my replays, which helped me get a better sense of where I was struggling in the matchup. It's still a hard matchup, and it's still my worst matchup, but that's a step you can take that gives you more control and allows you to focus on learning more about the matchup. If you find a really nice sparring partner, they could even help you drill a scenario that you're really bad at dealing with. So one of my favorite stories that I feel like gave me a really strong edge over a lot of Zergs on the ladder was having this guy in our clan. His name was All In Porsche, and he was a Protoss. And I'll be honest, he cannon rushed a lot of Zergs. And a lot of people in the clan really didn't like him for doing that. They were like, we're on the same team. How could you do this to me? Like, they felt personally attacked that this person would cannon rush them. But he was a nice guy. It wasn't like BM or anything. He just put cannons next to people's bases. So he offered, after he cannon rushed me one time, he's like, hey, do you want to practice this? Because we're teammates, and he had that mindset of, I want to help you out. You're my teammate. other Protoss are going to cannon rush you too. So do you want to train? And I said, yeah. So we trained cannon rush defense a whole bunch. And of course, for the first several times, I'm just getting destroyed over and over again. But it created a path where I was able to get so good at defending his cannon rushes that whenever I would face cannon rushes on the ladder, I would just smash them. And it was almost like a free win for me because I had practiced it so many times. So that can be a strategy for yourself, is you find a strat that really tilts you, that you feel like you're very bad against, and then find someone who's nice enough to help you practice that. It could be a friend who's a couple leagues higher, and they can just execute that for you and give you that training scenario. But deliberate practice is really, really key to taking a large and complex game, one that has a ton of moving parts, and finding a few scenarios in it where you know for a fact that you need to put in a lot of work, and then doing it. Chapter 3, The Path.